The designer zipper refused to budge, and Aria Matthews found herself on her knees in front of the most dangerous man in New York City, her hands trembling as they hovered near his very expensive, very stuck trousers. This was not in her job description. "Well?" Dante Moretti's voice cut through the silence of the private dressing room like a blade through silk. "Are you going to help me, or just stare?" Aria's eyes snapped up to meet his, her heart hammering against her ribcage. 3 months working as his personal assistant, and she'd never seen him like this. Vulnerable, flustered, almost human. The man who commanded fear with a single glance now stood trapped by Italian craftsmanship, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack diamonds. "I'm thinking," she said, buying herself time as heat crept up her neck. "This isn't exactly standard assistant protocol." "Standard protocol," Dante repeated, his dark eyes narrowing. "I'm about to walk into the most important fashion event of the season in front of every major player in this city, and my zipper is caught on the fabric of these ridiculously overpriced pants. Standard protocol can go to hell." The Valentino suit had cost more than Aria's annual salary. She knew because she'd been the one to pick it up from the boutique yesterday, carefully transporting it in its protective garment bag like it was made of spun gold. Now that same suit was staging a rebellion, and she was the only one who could negotiate peace terms. "All right," she breathed, rolling her shoulders back. "Let me see what's happening." She leaned closer, and immediately regretted it. Dante smelled like sandalwood and danger, an intoxicating combination that made her thoughts scatter like frightened birds. "Focus, Aria. This is just another problem to solve, just like scheduling conflicts or vendor negotiations. Except those didn't involve being inches away from her boss's most intimate areas." The zipper had caught a piece of the silk lining, twisting it into the metal teeth with what seemed like malicious intent. She reached out carefully, her fingers brushing against the fabric of his shirt. Dante's breath hitched slightly, and she froze. "Sorry," she muttered. "Just fix it." His tone was commanding as always, but she detected something else underneath. Embarrassment? Awareness? Whatever it was, it made her own pulse quicken in response. She'd spent months perfecting the art of being invisible around him, blending into the background of his dangerous, complicated life. Now she was front and center in the worst possible way. Aria tried pulling the fabric free, but it only seemed to make things worse. The zipper dug deeper into the silk, creating a more tangled mess. She bit her lip, concentrating, trying to ignore how Dante's muscles tensed under her touch. "This would be easier if you weren't so tense," she said without thinking. "Excuse me?" She looked up at him again, and the expression on his face made her stomach flip. Dante Moretti didn't do embarrassment. He orchestrated million-dollar deals, commanded loyalty from men twice his size, and had a reputation that made grown men cross themselves. But right now, with his zipper stuck and his assistant kneeling before him, he looked almost vulnerable. "I just mean," she continued quickly, "if you could relax a bit, maybe I could work the fabric free without making it worse." "Relax," he said flatly. "You want me to relax? It was just a suggestion." He exhaled slowly through his nose, and she watched his chest rise and fall beneath the crisp white shirt. When had she started noticing things like that? When had her strictly professional relationship with her boss started feeling like something else entirely? "How long until the event starts?" he asked. Aria checked her watch, then wished she hadn't. 23 minutes. Dante cursed in Italian, a string of words she didn't understand but could certainly interpret. She'd picked up enough context over the past 3 months to know when he was truly frustrated. This qualified. "Okay," she said, more to herself than to him. "I need to try something else." "Whatever you need to do it." The authority in his voice should have been reassuring, but instead it sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. This was dangerous territory. Not the kind of danger that came with working for a man like Dante. She'd made peace with that the day she accepted the position. This was the kind of danger that came from being too close to something you weren't supposed to want. Before hitting subscribe and diving deeper into this disaster, let me tell you that you're not going to believe what happens next. Hit that button now because trust me, you'll want to see how this plays out. She tried a different angle, her fingers working carefully at the trapped fabric. The silk was expensive and delicate, and the last thing she needed was to damage it beyond repair. But the zipper seemed determined to hold its prisoner, metal teeth clamped tight around the material. "I might need to use my teeth," she said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. "What?" "The fabric is caught really tight," Arya explained, keeping her eyes focused on the problem at hand, rather than looking up at him. "My fingers alone might not give me enough precision to work it free. If I can use my teeth to hold one part steady while my hands manipulate the zipper..." She trailed off, waiting for him to tell her to call a tailor or rip the pants off entirely. Instead, Dante said, "Do what you need to do." His voice had dropped an octave, rough around the edges in a way that made her hyper-aware of every nerve ending in her body. This was insane. Completely, utterly insane. But they were running out of time, and he was running out of options. Arya leaned in closer, her breath ghosting across the fabric as she carefully took a piece of the trapped silk between her teeth. This close, she could feel the heat radiating from him, could sense the tension coiled in his body like a spring wound too tight. She tried not to think about the intimacy of the position, tried not to acknowledge the way her hands trembled slightly as they returned to work on the zipper. "Easy," Dante murmured above her, and she wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. She held the fabric steady with her teeth while her fingers worked at the zipper pull, trying to ease it back without tearing anything. The metal was stubborn, refusing to cooperate, and she had to adjust her angle twice. Each movement brought her closer to him until she was acutely aware of every breath he took, every minute shift of his body. The zipper gave a little, and hope flared in her chest. She kept working, patient and methodical despite the awkwardness of the situation. The fabric began to slide free, millimeter by millimeter, and she could taste victory along with the expensive silk between her teeth. "That's it," Dante said softly. "Keep going." The words shouldn't have affected her the way they did. They were just encouragement, just acknowledgement that her method was working. But something about his tone, about the rough quality of his voice, made her stomach tighten with an awareness she'd been trying to ignore for weeks. She freed another section of fabric, her concentration absolute. Just a little more, and she'd have it. Just a few more careful movements, and they could both pretend this never happened. She could go back to being invisible, and he could go back to being untouchable. The perfume bottle fell off the vanity with a crash that made them both jump. Arya's teeth released the fabric as she jerked back in surprise, and Dante's hand shot out to steady himself against the wall. The bottle, some ridiculously expensive designer fragrance, had toppled from its perch and shattered against the marble floor, sending up a cloud of scent that immediately filled the room. "Don't move," Dante commanded as Arya started to stand. She froze, realizing she was still on her knees among broken glass and liquid that probably cost more per ounce than her car payment. Dante's hand came into her field of vision, extended toward her, and she stared at it for a moment before understanding. "Take my hand," he said. "The glass." She placed her hand in his, and he pulled her up smoothly, his grip firm and warm. For a moment they stood close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could count his eyelashes if she wanted to. The broken perfume bottle lay forgotten between them, its scent rising like expensive fog. "Your pants," she said, remembering. "The zipper." Dante looked down, and his expression shifted from concern to resignation. In the chaos of the falling bottle, the fabric had twisted even tighter in the zipper's grip. If anything, it looked worse than before. "Dio mio," he muttered. "Let me try again," Arya offered, though the thought of getting back down on her knees in front of him made her mouth go dry. "We don't have time." He checked his watch. and she could see the frustration etched in the lines of his face. 15 minutes. Then we make time. She met his eyes with more confidence than she felt. I'm not letting you walk out there with a broken zipper. That's not how Dante Moretti makes an entrance. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, or appreciation. He nodded once, sharp and decisive, and she took it as permission to continue. This time, when she knelt, she was more aware of the glass surrounding them, of the cloying sweetness of the spilled perfume making her slightly light-headed. Dante had shifted his stance slightly, and she could see the tension in his legs, in the way he held himself rigidly above her. Try to relax, she said again, and this time he didn't argue. She went back to work with renewed determination, her hands steadier now, despite the absurdity of the situation. The fabric had twisted during their interruption, creating a new knot that seemed even more impossible than the first. But Arya had always been good at solving impossible problems. It was why Dante had hired her in the first place. Her fingers worked quickly, finding the rhythm of the task. Pull here, ease there, gentle pressure on the zipper pull while coaxing the silk free from between the metal teeth. It was like performing surgery, except her patient was extremely expensive Italian tailoring, and her operating room smelled like someone had dumped an entire perfume counter onto the floor. You're good at this, Dante observed. At unsticking. Zippers? At staying calm under pressure. The compliment caught her off guard, and she nearly lost her grip on the zipper. In 3 months of working for him, Dante had never commented on her performance beyond the occasional grunt of approval or nod of acknowledgement. He wasn't the type to hand out praise freely, which made these words feel significant. Thank you, she managed, returning her focus to the task. When I hired you, I wasn't sure you'd last a week. Her hands paused. What? You seemed too soft. He said the word like it was a foreign concept. Too idealistic for the kind of work I do. And now? The question escaped before she could stop it. Now I'm standing here with my zipper stuck, completely at your mercy. I'd say my initial assessment needed revision. There was humor in his voice, dark and dry, and it made something warm unfold in Arya's chest. She'd heard him laugh before, sharp, mocking sounds, usually directed at his enemies or their stupidity. But this was different. This was almost friendly. The fabric suddenly gave way, sliding free from the zipper with a soft whisper of silk against metal. Arya sat back on her heels, triumphant. Got it! She looked up at Dante, expecting relief or satisfaction. Instead, she found him staring down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. His eyes were dark, intense in a way that had nothing to do with anger or frustration. The air between them felt charged, electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Arya, he said, and her name in his mouth sounded different than she'd ever heard it. She should stand up, should put distance between them, should laugh this off and return to the safety of professional boundaries. Instead, she stayed exactly where she was, caught in the gravity of his gaze. The door handle rattled, and they both jumped. Mr. Moretti? A voice called from the hallway. The car is ready. We need to leave in 5 minutes. I'll be right there, Dante called back, his eyes never leaving Arya's face. She finally stood, brushing imaginary dust from her skirt. The spell was broken, or at least temporarily suspended. Dante adjusted his jacket, checking his reflection in the mirror with the practiced ease of someone who'd been performing for an audience his entire life. Thank you, he said quietly. It's my job. No. He turned to face her fully. Your job is to manage my schedule and keep my life organized. This was something else. Before she could respond, he was moving toward the door, his stride confident and powerful. The man who'd been trapped by a zipper 5 minutes ago had vanished, replaced by the Dante Moretti the world knew and feared. But just before he opened the door, he paused and looked back at her. You should fix your lipstick, he said. It's smudged. Then he was gone, leaving Arya alone, in a room that smelled like broken perfume and impossible situations. She turned to the mirror and saw he was right. Her carefully applied lipstick was indeed smudged, probably from when she'd been using her teeth on his zipper. The memory made heat flood her face all over again. She grabbed her purse and pulled out her lipstick, repairing the damage with shaking hands. This was fine. Everything was fine. They'd gotten through an awkward situation, and now they could both move on and never speak of it again. That's how professionals handled these things. Except she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her. Couldn't stop replaying the rough quality of his voice when he'd said her name. Couldn't stop wondering what might have happened if that door handle hadn't rattled when it did. "Get it together, Arya," she told her reflection firmly. The woman staring back at her looked flushed and slightly disheveled, despite her now perfect lipstick. This was dangerous territory, and she knew it. Dante Moretti wasn't just her boss. He was dangerous in every sense of the word. The kind of man mothers warned their daughters about. The kind of man who could ruin you without even trying. And yet. She grabbed her phone and the small clutch she'd brought for the event, carefully navigating around the broken glass as she headed for the door. Whatever had just happened in this dressing room, it was over now. They'd go to the event. She'd do her job, and life would return to normal. At least, that's what she tried to tell herself. The hallway outside was bustling with activity. Security personnel talking into their earpieces, event coordinators rushing past with clipboards, the organized chaos that always surrounded Dante wherever he went. Arya fell into step behind him automatically, maintaining the professional distance she'd perfected over the past 3 months. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the way her heart still raced, in the way her skin felt too sensitive beneath her dress. The carefully constructed walls she'd built between them had developed cracks, and she wasn't sure how to repair them. If you're enjoying this chaotic disaster and want to see what happens when they actually make it to the event, make sure you've hit that like button and drop a comment below, telling me if you think Arya should have just let him walk out with the broken zipper. And trust me, you'll want to stick around because this night is about to get even more complicated. The elevator ride down to the lobby was silent except for the quiet murmur of his security team discussing logistics. Dante stood at the front, his posture perfect, every inch the powerful man he was supposed to be. If the zipper incident had affected him at all, he showed no sign of it. Arya tried to emulate his composure, but her mind kept drifting back to the dressing room, to the feeling of his hand in hers when he'd pulled her up from the broken glass, to the way his breath had hitched when her fingers had brushed against him, to that moment of charged silence before they'd been interrupted. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "This is exactly how people get hurt in situations like this. You're his assistant, not whatever your imagination is trying to make this into." The elevator doors opened to reveal the lobby of the luxury hotel, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. A small crowd had gathered near the entrance, photographers mostly, hoping to catch glimpses of the wealthy and powerful attendees as they arrived for the fashion event. Dante's presence caused an immediate stir, phones lifting to capture his image as he strode through the space with the confidence of a man who owned every room he entered. Arya followed at a discreet distance, her eyes scanning the crowd out of habit. It was part of her job to watch for potential problems, to anticipate needs before they arose. But tonight her attention kept drifting back to the man in front of her, to the way his suit jacket fit perfectly across his shoulders, to the way people instinctively moved out of his path. The car was waiting outside, a sleek black vehicle that screamed money and power. Dante's driver Marco stood by the open door, and Dante slid into the back seat with practiced ease. Arya hesitated for just a moment before following, settling into the seat across from him rather than beside him. It felt safer somehow, like the distance might help her regain her equilibrium. The door closed, cocooning them in leather-scented privacy. Through the tinted windows she could see the camera flashes still going off, capturing their departure. The car pulled smoothly into traffic, and suddenly they were alone again. Well, alone except for Marco in the driver's seat, separated from them by a privacy screen that was currently raised. Are you going to tell me what you're thinking? Dante asked, breaking the silence. Arya's eyes snapped to his. What? You've been staring out the window for the past 2 minutes with that expression you get when you're overthinking something. I don't have an expression. You absolutely do. One corner of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile. Your forehead gets this little crease right here. He gestured vaguely toward his own forehead. And you do this thing with your jaw where you clench it just slightly. The fact that he'd noticed these details about her was both flattering and terrifying. She'd spent so much energy trying to be invisible, trying to blend into the background of his life. Apparently, she'd failed more than she realized. I was just thinking about the schedule for tomorrow, she lied smoothly. Liar. The single word hung between them like a challenge. Arya met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away first. This was a game she'd learned to play working for him, the staring contest where the first person to blink lost whatever silent battle was being fought. Fine, she said finally. I was thinking about what happened back there. The zipper, she confirmed. Dante leaned back in his seat, studying her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. It was unfortunate. That's one word for it. What word would you use? Mortifying. Confusing. Entirely too intimate for an employer-employee relationship. Awkward, she settled on. Awkward, he repeated as if testing the word. Yes, I suppose it was. He didn't sound particularly bothered by it, which somehow made it worse. How could he be so calm when she felt like her entire professional foundation had just been shaken? How could he sit there looking perfectly composed when her heart was still racing from the memory of being on her knees in front of him? It won't happen again, she said, more to convince herself than him. No, Dante agreed. Next time I'll make sure to test the zipper before putting on the pants. Next time. As if there would be another situation where she'd need to be that close to him, that intimate with him. The thought made her stomach flip in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness. The car slowed as they approached the event venue, and Arya was grateful for the distraction. Through the windows she could see the red carpet, the gathered press, the A-list crowd already making their entrances. This was the world Dante moved through with ease, the world of money and power and influence. Are you ready? She asked, slipping back into her professional role like armor. Always. He adjusted his cuffs, and she couldn't help but notice his hands, strong, capable hands, that had been clenched into fists of frustration just half an hour ago. You'll stay close during the event? It wasn't really a question. She always stayed close during events, ready to handle whatever might arise. But something about the way he asked made it feel different tonight. Of course. The car stopped, and Marco appeared to open the door. Dante stepped out first, and the crowd's reaction was immediate. Cameras flashing, voices calling his name, the energy that always surrounded him crackling to life. He was in his element here, powerful and magnetic, and entirely in control. Arya followed him out, staying slightly behind and to the side, as was her habit. She'd perfected the art of being present, but invisible. There, but not worth noticing. Usually it was easy. Tonight, with the memory of the dressing room still fresh, it felt like wearing a costume that didn't quite fit anymore. They made their way down the red carpet, Dante stopping occasionally to acknowledge a photographer or exchange brief words with other attendees. Arya watched it all with professional detachment, her mind cataloging faces and names, anticipating which introductions might need to be made, which conversations might need to be facilitated. Mr. Moretti, a reporter thrust a microphone in their direction. Can you tell us what brings you to the fashion event tonight? I'm a patron of the arts, Dante replied smoothly, flashing the kind of smile that could sell anything, including dangerous lies wrapped in expensive suits. And I appreciate beautiful craftsmanship. His eyes flicked to Arya for just a moment, so brief that no one else would have noticed. But she noticed. Of course she noticed. They moved through the event space, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into something magical, with lighting and fabric and enough flowers to fill a garden. Arya recognized several faces from magazines and television. Actors, models, designers, the kind of people who made their living being beautiful and interesting. Dante commanded attention without even trying. People gravitated toward him, drawn by his power and reputation. He was charming when he wanted to be, dangerous when he needed to be, and always absolutely in control of every interaction. Arya observed it all from her position slightly behind him, ready to step in if needed, but content to remain in the shadows. This was familiar territory, comfortable in its predictability. She could handle this. What she couldn't handle was the way her body still hummed with awareness every time Dante moved, every time his voice dropped into that lower register, every time his eyes found hers across the crowd. The champagne flowed like water, expensive and endless, and Arya had positioned herself near the bar, where she could observe the entire room. Dante was currently engaged in conversation with a fashion designer whose work had been featured prominently in the event, and she watched the interaction with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read her boss's moods from across a crowded room. He was bored. She could tell by the way his fingers drummed once against his thigh, a tell so subtle that most people would miss it entirely. But Arya had spent 3 months learning his language, the small gestures and micro-expressions that revealed what his carefully controlled facade never would. She was about to move closer, ready to provide an excuse for him to extract himself from the conversation, when she felt, rather than saw him tense. His entire body went rigid for a fraction of a second before his composure snapped back into place, but it was enough to send alarm bells ringing in her head. Arya followed his gaze and felt her own stomach drop. The zipper. His hand had moved subtly to his side, and even from across the room she could see the realization dawning in his expression. Something was wrong with the pants again. Their eyes met across the crowd, and the message in his dark gaze was clear. Help me. Now! She moved through the crowd with practiced efficiency, excusing herself past clusters of conversation until she reached his side. The designer was still talking, oblivious to the silent crisis unfolding in front of her. Mr. Moretti? Arya interrupted smoothly. I apologize for the interruption, but you have an urgent call from Tokyo. They insisted it couldn't wait. It was a lie they'd used before, polished and believable. Dante's expression shifted to one of mild annoyance, perfectly calibrated for his audience. Of course, he said. You'll excuse me, Isabella. Business never sleeps. The designer smiled and waved him away, already turning to greet someone else. Arya led Dante toward the back of the venue, away from the main crowd, her mind racing through options. They needed privacy. They needed it fast, and they needed to fix whatever was happening with that cursed zipper before anyone noticed. There's a private lounge area near the back, she said quietly, her hand barely touching his elbow to guide him. The event coordinator mentioned it earlier. How bad is it? Dante asked under his breath. I don't know yet. What happened? The zipper's sliding down on its own. I think when you fixed it earlier, something came loose. Every time I move, it drops a little more. Arya's mind flashed with images of Dante's pants literally falling down in the middle of a room full of New York's elite, and she had to suppress a slightly hysterical laugh. This couldn't be happening. This absolutely could not be happening twice in one night. They reached the lounge area, a smaller room decorated with plush velvet couches and dim lighting, blessedly empty. The moment the door closed behind them, Dante turned to face her, and she could see the frustration etched in every line of his body. Show me, she said, all business, despite the way her heart was trying to hammer its way out of her chest. Dante's jaw clenched. This is ridiculous. Yes, well, ridiculous is apparently the theme of tonight. Let me see. He moved his hand away from his side, and she could immediately see the problem. The zipper had indeed slid down about 2 inches, and even as she watched, it slipped another fraction of an inch lower. The mechanism was completely failing, probably damaged from their earlier struggles. "We need to stabilize it," she said, moving closer. If you can what?" Dante's voice was rough with frustration. "Arya, this zipper is actively trying to humiliate me. I have 3 more hours at this event, and I can't spend them holding my pants up like some kind of—" "Stop talking and let me think," she interrupted, surprising both of them. For a moment silence stretched between them. Then Dante huffed out a breath that might have been a laugh if he weren't so clearly aggravated. "You're getting bold. Someone has to be, since you're currently falling apart." "I don't fall apart." "Your pants would argue otherwise." This time he did laugh, short and sharp and genuinely amused despite their situation. Arya felt something loosen in her chest at the sound. At least they could find humor in the absolute absurdity of this disaster. She knelt in front of him again, because apparently that was just going to be her position for the entire night, and examined the zipper more closely. The slider was bent slightly, probably from when she'd forced it earlier. It wasn't holding the teeth together properly, which was why it kept sliding down. "I need to bend this back," she said, "but I can't do it while you're wearing the pants. The angle is wrong." The silence that followed was so complete she could hear her own heartbeat. When she looked up, Dante was staring down at her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. "You want me to take off my pants," he said slowly. "I want to fix your zipper so you don't expose yourself to half of New York's social elite," she corrected. "If you have a better solution, I'm all ears. Make sure you're subscribed because this is about to get even more complicated, and you're going to want to see how Arya handles this situation. Trust me when I say the next few minutes are going to be unforgettable." Dante ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the perfectly styled waves. It was the most disheveled she'd ever seen him, and something about it made him seem more real, more human than the untouchable figure he usually projected. "Fine," he said finally. "But if you tell anyone about this—" "Who would I tell? And who would believe me?" Arya stood, creating some distance between them. "I'll turn around. You take off the pants, and I'll fix the zipper. Simple." Nothing about this was simple, but they were committed now. She turned her back to him, staring resolutely at a piece of abstract art on the wall while she listened to the sounds of fabric rustling behind her. Her imagination was working overtime, painting pictures her professional relationship with Dante absolutely did not need. She focused on the art instead. Splashes of color that were probably meant to represent something profound, but just looked like someone had thrown paint at a canvas. "Done," Dante said, his voice tighter than usual. Arya turned around, keeping her eyes carefully on his face. He'd draped the pants over the back of one of the velvet couches and was standing there in his shirt, boxer briefs, socks, and shoes. An image so incongruous with his usual impeccable appearance that she had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. "Not a word," he warned. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were thinking it very loudly." She grabbed the pants and examined the zipper in the better light, grateful for something to focus on, besides the fact that her boss was currently half-dressed in a private lounge while a party raged outside. The slider was definitely bent, but she thought she could work it back into shape with enough careful manipulation. Her hands worked quickly, bending the metal slightly, testing the mechanism, adjusting again when it didn't hold properly. It was delicate work, requiring concentration and precision. 2 things that were surprisingly difficult to maintain when she could feel Dante's eyes on her. "How did you learn to do this?" he asked after a moment. "Do what?" "Fix zippers?" "Fix everything. You always know what to do, how to handle whatever crisis comes up. It's one of your most valuable qualities." Arya paused in her work, surprised by the observation. "I had to learn quickly. Growing up, my mom worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. When things broke, we couldn't afford to replace them or hire someone to fix them, so I figured it out. That must have been difficult. It was life." She returned her attention to the zipper, uncomfortable with the personal turn the conversation had taken. "We did what we had to do." And now you're here, fixing the wardrobe malfunctions of overprivileged men who probably deserve to walk around with broken zippers. She looked up at that, meeting his eyes. There was something in his expression. Self-awareness, maybe, or a hint of self-deprecation that she'd never heard from him before. "You're not that bad," she said quietly. "I'm worse. You just haven't been around long enough to see it. I've seen enough." She'd finished with the zipper, testing it several times to make sure it would hold. "I've seen you donate anonymously to charities, even though you pretend not to care. I've seen you help people who work for you when they're in trouble, even while maintaining that ruthless reputation. You're not as bad as you want people to think." Dante was silent for a long moment, and when she risked another glance at his face, she found him studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You see too much," he said softly. "Maybe you show too much to the right people." The air between them felt charged again, electric with something unnamed. Arya held out the pants, trying to break whatever spell was weaving itself around them. "Fixed," she announced. "The zipper should hold now, but try not to put too much strain on it." Dante took the pants, but didn't immediately put them on. Instead, he stood there, close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat, could count the individual lashes framing his dark eyes. "Arya," he said, and there was that tone again, the one that made her name sound different, important, weighted with meaning she wasn't sure she wanted to understand. "We should get back," she interrupted, stepping away before she could do something stupid. "People will notice you're gone. Let them notice." "Dante, why? Do you do that?" He moved closer, and she found herself backing up until her legs hit the edge of the couch. "Every time there's a moment between us, you retreat. You hide behind professionalism and boundaries, and that careful distance you maintain so perfectly. Because those boundaries exist for a reason," she said, but her voice came out breathier than she intended. "You're my boss. This is my job. We can't. Can't what?" He was directly in front of her now, still holding the pants in one hand while the other came to rest on the back of the couch beside her hip. Not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Say it." "Can't cross lines that shouldn't be crossed," she finished, but the words felt hollow even as she said them. "What if I want to cross them?" Her heart stopped, started again, raced forward at double speed. This couldn't be happening. Dante Moretti, dangerous, powerful, completely off-limits Dante Moretti, could not be suggesting what she thought he was suggesting. "You don't mean that," she whispered. "Don't tell me what I mean." His voice had dropped to that low register that did dangerous things to her composure. "I've spent 3 months watching you, Arya. 3 months noticing things I shouldn't notice about someone who works for me. The way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. The way you twist that ring on your finger when you're nervous. The way you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not paying attention. Dante, the way you're looking at me right now." She was looking at him like he was gravity, and she was falling, helpless to stop it. Looking at him like all those carefully constructed walls had finally crumbled completely. Looking at him like she wanted things she had no business wanting. "This is a bad idea," she said, but she didn't move away. "Probably the worst I've had in years. We'll regret it. Maybe." He shifted closer and she could smell his cologne mixed with something uniquely him. "Or maybe we'll regret not taking the chance when we had it." His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about him. Arya's eyes fluttered closed for just a moment, letting herself feel the warmth of his touch, the barely restrained tension in his body. "Tell me to stop," Dante murmured, his breath ghosting across her lips. "Tell me this is too far, and I'll put on these pants and we'll go back to the party and pretend this never happened." She should tell him to stop. Should push him away and retreat behind those professional boundaries that had kept her safe for 3 months. Should remember that he was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with his reputation and everything to do with the way he made her feel. Instead, she opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. "I don't want you to stop." The words hung between them for a heartbeat. 2, 3. Then Dante was kissing her, and every coherent thought fled from her mind. His mouth was demanding and skilled, tasting of champagne and something darker, more intoxicating. His hand slid from her face to tangle in her hair while his body pressed against hers, all controlled power and barely restrained desire. Arya kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands finding their way to his shoulders, feeling the muscles tense beneath her touch. This was insane. This was reckless and unprofessional, and probably the worst decision she'd ever made. And she couldn't bring herself to care. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante rested his forehead against hers. "We can't go back from this." "I know," she whispered. "Everything changes now." "I know." He pulled back enough to look at her properly, his eyes searching her face for something. "Are you sure?" It was the uncertainty in his voice that decided her, the crack in his usually impenetrable armor that revealed the man beneath the reputation. Dante Moretti, asking if she was sure, giving her an out even though it clearly cost him to do it. "I'm sure," she said, and meant it. The smile that crossed his face was unlike any she'd seen before, genuine and warm and just for her. He kissed her again, slower this time, savoring rather than consuming. When he finally stepped back, she immediately missed his warmth. "I should put these on," he said, gesturing to the pants he was still somehow holding, "before someone comes looking for us. Probably a good idea." She turned around again while he dressed, her mind reeling from everything that had just happened. What did this mean? Where did they go from here? How did they navigate the complicated territory they'd just entered? "You can look now," Dante said, amusement coloring his tone. She turned to find him fully dressed, looking every inch the powerful man he was supposed to be. Except now she knew what he looked like vulnerable, knew the taste of his mouth, knew the way his breath hitched when she touched him just right. "Your lipstick is smudged again," he observed with a slight smile. "Whose fault is that?" "Mine. Entirely mine." He pulled out his phone and checked the time. "We've been gone 18 minutes. People will definitely have noticed." "What do we tell them?" "The truth, that you were handling an urgent matter for me." His eyes gleamed with dark humor. "They don't need to know the specifics." Before you find out what happens when they return to the party, hit that like button if you're rooting for these two disaster humans to figure things out. And drop a comment telling me if you think Arya just made the best or worst decision of her life. Arya fixed her lipstick, using her phone camera as a mirror while Dante watched with an expression that could only be described as proprietary. Something had shifted between them. Something fundamental and irreversible. The question was whether they'd survive it. "Ready?" he asked, offering her his arm. She looked at his extended arm, then up at his face. This was it. The moment where they either committed to whatever this was, or retreated to safety. Taking his arm meant acknowledging the change, accepting the consequences. Arya placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. "Ready?" They walked back to the party together, and if anyone noticed the slightly rumpled quality to Dante's appearance, or the flush in Arya's cheeks, they were too polite or too smart to comment. The event continued around them, oblivious to the small drama that had played out in the private lounge. But everything felt different now. When Dante's hand brushed against her lower back as they navigated through the crowd, it felt intentional rather than accidental. When their eyes met across the room while he spoke with other guests, the look they exchanged carried weight and promise. When he leaned close to murmur something about an upcoming appointment in her ear, his breath against her skin sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with temperature. They were playing a dangerous game, and they both knew it. But for the first time in her carefully controlled life, Arya found she didn't care about the danger. She'd spent 3 months being cautious, being professional, being invisible. Tonight, she'd been seen. Really seen. And there was no going back. The rest of the event passed in a blur of conversations and champagne and stolen glances. Arya fulfilled her duties with her usual efficiency, but her awareness was split between her professional responsibilities and the man standing across the room whose dark eyes kept finding hers. When the night finally wound down and they made their way back to the car, the tension between them was palpable. Marco held the door open, and this time, when Arya slid into the back seat, she sat beside Dante rather than across from him. It was a small change, but it spoke volumes. The privacy screen went up, and suddenly they were alone in the dim interior of the car. The city lights flashed by outside, painting moving shadows across Dante's face. He looked at her for a long moment, then reached over and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "This complicates things," he said quietly. "Everything about you is complicated." "True." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand, a surprisingly gentle gesture. "But this is different. You work for me. People will talk. There will be consequences. I know. You could lose respect, credibility. People might think you slept your way into your position, even though we both know that's not true. I know that too." She squeezed his hand. "I'm not naive, Dante. I understand what I'm walking into." "Then why?" It was a good question. Why risk her career, her reputation, everything she'd worked for? The practical answer was that she shouldn't. The smart answer was that this was a disaster waiting to happen. But neither of those answers captured the truth. "Because for 3 months, I've been half alive," she said finally. "Going through motions, maintaining distance, pretending not to feel things I very clearly feel. And tonight, in that dressing room with your stupid zipper and that absurd situation, I felt more alive than I have in years. Because you make me feel alive, even when you're being impossible and arrogant and frustrating." Dante's expression softened in a way she'd never seen before. "You make me feel human," he said. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How most people look at me and see either a threat or an opportunity, but never just a person?" "I see you," she said simply. "I know. That's the problem." He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, tucking herself against his side. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not, but you've got me anyway." They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, her head on his shoulder while his arm wrapped around her. It felt natural, easy in a way that probably should have worried her, but instead just felt right. When the car finally pulled up to her apartment building, Dante walked her to the door despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. They stood in the soft glow of the building's entrance lights, suddenly awkward now that the evening was ending. "So," Arya said, "tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Dante agreed. "You'll come to the office as usual?" "As usual. And we'll figure out how to navigate this situation together." He smiled at that, quick and genuine. Then he leaned down and kissed her, soft and sweet and full of promise. When he pulled back, his hand lingered on her cheek. "Get some sleep, Arya." "You too." She watched him walk back to the car, watched it pull away into the night. Then she practically floated up to her apartment, her mind replaying every moment of the impossible, wonderful, terrifying evening. Her phone buzzed just as she was getting ready for bed. A text from Dante. "Thank you for everything. Especially the zipper." She laughed and typed back, "Just doing my job." His response came immediately. "That was never just a job. Good night, Arya." She fell asleep with a smile on her face, her dreams full of dark eyes and dangerous promises, and the feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Arya found herself more nervous than she'd ever been heading to work. What if last night had been a mistake? What if Dante regretted everything in the harsh light of day? What if the magic of the evening couldn't survive reality? But when she walked into the office and saw him standing by the window in his usual commanding posture, when he turned and smiled at her, really smiled, not the careful expression he used for business. All her doubts evaporated. "Good morning," he said, and those simple words carried the weight of everything unsaid. "Good morning," she replied, setting down her bag and pulling out her tablet. "You have a meeting with the board at 10, lunch with the Castellano family at 1, and Arya." She looked up. "Yes? I'm glad you're here." "I work here. Where else would I be?" "No." He crossed the room until he stood in front of her desk. "I'm glad you're here. With me." Her heart did that ridiculous fluttering thing again, and she couldn't help but smile. "I'm glad I'm here too." "Good. Now, about that board meeting, I'm going to need you in the room. Not as my assistant, but as my advisor. I want your input on the Carmichael acquisition." It was a promotion disguised as a request, a shift in their professional dynamic that acknowledged her value beyond just organizing his schedule. And coming the morning after everything that had happened, it felt significant. "I'd be honored," she said. The morning proceeded normally, or as normally as anything could after the previous night. They fell into their usual rhythms, Arya anticipating his needs, Dante relying on her judgment, both of them working together with the seamless efficiency they'd developed over 3 months. But underneath it all ran a current of awareness, a knowledge of each other that hadn't been there before. During the board meeting, when Dante asked her opinion on a particularly tricky clause in the acquisition contract, she felt the eyes of every person in the room on her, but she met his gaze steadily and gave her assessment with confidence. He nodded, taking her advice, and she saw the flash of pride in his expression. This was going to work. They would make it work. Because despite the complications and consequences and very real dangers of mixing business with whatever this was becoming, they both knew that some things were worth the risk. And as she sat in that boardroom, watching Dante command the attention of powerful men while occasionally seeking her input, watching him trust her judgment and value her perspective, Arya realized something important. This wasn't about the thrill of the forbidden or the excitement of danger. This was about finding someone who saw you completely and chose you anyway. Someone who made you want to be braver, stronger, better. Someone whose stupid zipper malfunction led to the best disaster of your life. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, Dante hung back until they were alone. "You were brilliant in there. I just answered a question. You did more than that. You held your own against men who have been playing this game for decades." He moved closer, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that was becoming dangerously familiar. "You're full of surprises, Arya Matthews." "You haven't seen anything yet," she replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "Is that a promise?" "Maybe. I guess you'll have to wait and find out." His eyes darkened with something that made her pulse quicken. "I look forward to it." Before we wrap up this disaster of a night turned incredible beginning, make sure you've subscribed to the channel, smashed that like button, and left a comment telling me what you think happens next. Do they manage to keep things professional at work? Does anyone find out about their relationship? And most importantly, does Dante ever buy pants with a functioning zipper? The lunch with the Castellano family went smoothly, with Arya once again positioned at Dante's side rather than in the background. She was beginning to understand that this was his way of making a statement, to the world, to her, to himself. They were partners now, in whatever form that took. As the day wound down and the office began to empty, Arya found herself alone with Dante in his office one more time. He was reviewing contracts, and she was updating his schedule for the following week, both of them comfortable in the silence. "Dinner?" Dante asked suddenly, looking up from his work. "Is that a professional dinner or a personal dinner? Does it matter?" "It might." He set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "Personal. Definitely personal. I want to take you somewhere nice, somewhere we can talk without worrying about who might overhear or what people might think." "That sounds perfect." They ended up at a small Italian restaurant tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place that didn't need to advertise, because the people who knew about it guarded it jealously. Dante was greeted warmly by the owner, and they were led to a private table in the back where they could see the whole restaurant but couldn't easily be seen. Over pasta and wine, they talked about everything and nothing. Their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. Arya learned that Dante had once wanted to be an architect, designing buildings instead of criminal empires. Dante learned that Arya had gotten her degree while working full-time, studying late into the night because she refused to let circumstances define her future. "You're extraordinary," Dante said at one point, his eyes soft in the candlelight. "I hope you know that. I'm ordinary with determination. There's nothing ordinary about you." As the night wore on and the restaurant began to empty, they lingered over espresso, neither wanting the evening to end. This felt real in a way that last night's passion hadn't quite managed. This felt like building something that might actually last. When they finally left, Dante drove her home himself, dismissing Marco for the evening. They sat in his car outside her building, neither moving to end the night. "This is crazy," Arya said softly. "Completely insane," Dante agreed. "We're going to have to be so careful." "I know. People will talk. There will be problems." "Probably." He took her hand again, that gesture that was becoming familiar. "But I haven't felt this alive in years, and I'm not ready to give that up. Are you?" Arya looked at their joined hands, at the way his thumb was tracing patterns on her skin, at the vulnerability in his expression. She thought about all the practical reasons this was a bad idea, all the ways it could go wrong, all the consequences they'd face. Then she thought about how it felt to be seen by him, to be valued for more than just her efficiency, to be chosen by someone who could have anyone. "No," she said finally, "I'm not ready to give this up either. Then we'll figure it out. Together." "Together," she agreed. He kissed her goodnight, soft and lingering, before watching her walk into her building. As Arya rode the elevator up to her apartment, she couldn't stop smiling. Yes, this was complicated. Yes, there would be challenges ahead. Yes, she was risking everything for a man whose zipper malfunction had started this whole mess. But as she got ready for bed that night, she couldn't bring herself to regret a single moment. Sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected disasters. Sometimes you had to take a risk to find what you'd been missing. And sometimes a stuck zipper was just the universe's way of pushing two people together who were too stubborn to admit they belonged that way. Her phone buzzed one last time before she fell asleep. Another text from Dante. "Sweet dreams, Arya. Tomorrow and every tomorrow after. I choose you," she typed back quickly. "I choose you too, even if your zippers don't." His response made her laugh out loud. "I'm buying better pants." Arya drifted off to sleep with her phone clutched in her hand and the promise of tomorrow filling her dreams. The Mafia boss's zipper disaster had turned into something neither of them expected. A beginning instead of an ending. A possibility instead of a problem. A future instead of just another night. And somewhere in the city, Dante Moretti lay awake in his own bed, thinking about a woman who'd changed everything by simply being brave enough to help him when he needed it most. Who'd seen past the reputation and the danger to the man underneath. Who made him want to be better, do better, build something real instead of just accumulating power. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new obstacles to navigate. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Dante Moretti fell asleep with hope in his heart and a smile on his face. All because of a zipper, a dressing room, and a woman brave enough to take a chance on the impossible. If you enjoyed watching, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories, and comment below with what you'd like to see next. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best love stories start with the worst wardrobe malfunctions.